Billionaire installed camera to watch his paralyzed triplets. What he saw the old maid doing shocked him. The fortress of silence. The rain did not just fall on the Blackwood estate, it seemed to assault it. Sheets of grey water hammered against the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of the living room, blurring the sprawling, manicured gardens outside into a smear of verdant gloom. Inside, the silence was heavier than the storm. It was a cold, sterile silence, the kind that money could buy but could not cure. Ethan Blackwood stood by the window, his reflection ghostly against the storm. At 35, he possessed the sharp, devastating elegance of a man who had conquered the business world but lost the war at home. His bespoke charcoal suit fit him perfectly, not a crease in sight, mirroring the rigid control he maintained over his emotions. He turned his back to the rain and looked at the center of the room. There, lined up against the pristine white wall like tragic art installations, were 3 high-tech wheelchairs. Sitting in them were his sons, Noah, Liam, and Oliver. The triplets were 4 years old, beautiful boys with golden blonde hair and eyes that held a maturity far too deep for their age. They were silent, their hands folded in their laps, watching a tablet screen that flickered with a mindless cartoon. They didn't laugh. They barely moved. Since the accident that had taken his wife Elena and left his sons with a diagnosis of permanent paralysis, the house had become a mausoleum. Ethan had hired the best doctors in the world. They had all said the same thing. Severe spinal trauma. They will likely never walk. Adaptation is the only path. Ethan refused to adapt. Instead, he simply froze. He walled off his heart and turned the care of his sons into a logistical operation. But the staff kept failing. The last nanny had been found scrolling through her phone while Oliver cried for water. She was gone within 10 minutes. Now he waited for the replacement. The heavy oak doors creaked open, and Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper, stepped in. "Sir, Miss Miller is here." Ethan checked his watch. "Send her in." Sarah Miller walked into the room, and for a moment the sterile air seemed to shift. She was not the matronly, experienced nurse he had expected from the agency's urgent dispatch. She was young, 25, with hair the color of roasted chestnuts, pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that were fiercely, unapologetically intelligent. She wore a simple grey blouse and trousers, her posture modest but unintimidated by the opulence surrounding her. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice steady. "I'm Sarah." Ethan didn't offer his hand. He looked her up and down, his gaze clinical. "You're young. My agency specified I needed someone with extensive medical background." "I have the certification, sir," Sarah replied, clutching her bag a little tighter. "And I have the energy. You've gone through 4 nannies in 6 months. Maybe you don't need more experience in care. Maybe you need someone who actually cares." Ethan's eyes narrowed. It was a bold thing to say to a man who could buy her entire neighborhood. But he was desperate. He had a flight to Tokyo in 5 hours for a merger that would define his company's decade. He needed a body in the room. "The job is simple, Miss Miller," Ethan said, walking over to the triplets. He didn't touch them. He rarely did anymore. The guilt was too physical, like an electric shock. "Feed them. Bathe them. Keep them comfortable. They are fragile. Do not try to move them from their chairs unless it is for bed or hygiene. No rough play, no excursions. This house is a controlled environment. Do you understand?" Sarah looked at the 3 boys. Noah looked up at her, his expression vacant. She offered him a small, warm smile, and for a split second, Noah's eyes widened. "I understand the rules," she said softly. "Good. Mrs. Higgins will show you the quarters. I leave at 4:00 p.m. As Sarah was led away, Ethan pulled his phone from his pocket. He dialed his head of security. "Is it done?" "Yes, Mr. Blackwood," The voice crackled in his ear. The 4K wide-angle lenses are installed. Living room, nursery, kitchen and hallways. Audio and video. Real-time feed to your private server. Invisible to the naked eye. Excellent, Ethan whispered. He glanced one last time at the hallway where Sarah had disappeared. I don't trust her. I don't trust anyone. If she makes one mistake, one single slip-up, I want to know before she even realizes she's done it. He wasn't hiring a nanny. He was setting a trap. He needed to know that his sons were safe, but deep down, Ethan Blackwood was looking for a reason to prove that the world was as incompetent and cruel as he believed it to be. By late afternoon, the house was quiet. Ethan's black limousine idled in the driveway. He walked into the living room one last time. Sarah was already there, kneeling beside Liam, adjusting the footrest of his chair. I am leaving, Ethan announced. I will be back in 7 days. If there is an emergency, call Dr. Evans immediately. Do not call me unless the house is burning down. Sarah stood up. Have a safe trip, Mr. Blackwood. The boys will be fine. They better be, he warned. He walked out without hugging his sons goodbye. He couldn't bear the feeling of their limp bodies in his arms. It was easier to be the cold billionaire father than the grieving widower. As the car pulled away, Ethan opened his laptop. The screen flickered to life, showing the living room he had just exited. The REC symbol pulsed in the corner. The surveillance had begun. The unusual method. Tokyo was a neon blur, a city of lights and noise that usually energized Ethan. But this time, sitting in the penthouse suite of the Aman Hotel, 30 floors above the chaos, he felt nothing but anxiety. The merger document sat ignored on the glass coffee table. His only focus was the large monitor he had set up on the desk, connected via a secure, encrypted line to his home in New York. It was 2 a.m. in Tokyo, which meant it was midday back home. Ethan loosened his tie and took a sip of whiskey, his eyes scanning the 4 distinct camera feeds. Kitchen, hallway, nursery, living room. For the first 24 hours, Sarah had been predictably boring. She prepared organic meals. She read them books. She wheeled them from room to room. Ethan had almost stopped watching, convinced she was just another mediocre employee who would do the bare minimum. But on the second day, the pattern changed. On the living room feed, Ethan saw Sarah push the coffee table against the wall. She cleared the center of the room, creating a large open space on the polished hardwood floor. "What are you doing?" Ethan muttered to the screen, leaning in. Sarah walked over to the boys. Ethan expected her to turn on the TV or hand them tablets. Instead, she took the tablets away. Oliver reached out, his little face crumpling into a cry, but Sarah shook her head gently. The high-quality microphones picked up her voice clearly. "No more screens today, guys," she said, her voice firm but kind. "We are going to work." "Work?" Ethan frowned. "They are paralyzed." "What work?" Then he saw her do something that made his heart stop. She walked over to Noah's chair, unbuckled the safety strap and lifted him out. She didn't carry him to the couch. She lowered him onto the floor, onto a thick rug she had laid out. She did the same for Liam and Oliver. "This is against protocol," Ethan hissed, his hand hovering over his phone to call Mrs. Higgins and have Sarah thrown out. "They are not supposed to be on the floor like dogs." But he didn't dial. Something in Sarah's demeanor stopped him. She wasn't ignoring them. She was intensely focused. She sat on the floor in front of them. "Okay," she said, clapping her hands. "I know your legs feel like they are sleeping. I know Daddy says they don't work, but muscles have memory, boys. And we are going to wake them up." She began to massage Noah's legs. It wasn't a gentle, comforting rub. It looked rigorous, almost clinical. She pressed into the calves, moved the ankles in circles, and flexed the knees. Noah winced slightly, and Ethan flinched in his hotel room. "Does that hurt?" Sarah asked Noah. "A little," the boy whispered. "Good," Sarah smiled. "Pain means the nerves are listening. If you couldn't feel it, I'd be worried." Ethan sat back, stunned. The doctors had said there was no sensation. Had they been wrong, or was Sarah lying to give them false hope? He watched for 3 hours. She moved from one boy to the next, sweating, her hair coming loose from her ponytail. She stretched their limbs, forcing them to sit up without support for seconds at a time until they toppled over onto pillows. When they fell, she didn't rush to pick them up. "Up!" she commanded. "Use your core, use your tummy muscles. Come on, Oliver. Push!" On the screen, Oliver struggled. His face turned red. He looked on the verge of tears. He reached his hand out to Sarah, begging to be lifted. Ethan's grip on his whiskey glass tightened until his knuckles turned white. "Pick him up," he growled at the screen. "Damn it, help him!" Sarah didn't move. She stayed just out of reach. "You can do it, Ollie. I'm right here. But you have to do the work." Slowly, agonizingly, Oliver pushed his hands into the rug. He groaned, his small body shaking, and managed to prop his torso up. "Yes," Sarah cheered, clapping. "Look at that! You're strong!" Oliver beamed. It was the first time Ethan had seen his son smile, really smile, in 2 years. Ethan slumped back in his chair. He was confused. This was reckless. It defied every medical instruction he had been given. She was pushing them to the point of exhaustion. And yet, the look on Oliver's face haunted him. By the 3rd day of the trip, Ethan was barely sleeping. He was obsessed with the feed. He watched as Sarah escalated the sessions. She brought in resistance bands. She played music and made them try to crawl to the beat. She was relentless. But on the morning of the 4th day, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Sarah was in the kitchen. She had placed the boys' lunch, sippy cups of juice and cut sandwiches, on the low coffee table in the living room. The boys were on the floor, about 5 feet away. "Lunchtime," Sarah announced, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. "Hungry," Liam said, reaching out. "Food is right there," Sarah said, pointing to the table. "Go get it." "Can't," Noah whimpered. "Can," Sarah corrected. "Crawl. Drag yourselves. I don't care how you do it, but I'm not bringing it to you." Ethan stood up in his hotel room, knocking his chair over. "That's enough," he shouted at the silent room. "This is cruelty. This is abuse." He watched in horror as his sons began to drag their bodies across the floor. It was a pathetic, heartbreaking sight. They were crying now, frustrated and hungry. Sarah stood like a statue, her face unreadable, though Ethan thought he saw a sheen of tears in her eyes too. But she didn't move. "Come on," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I know you hate me right now, but you have to move." It took them 10 minutes to cross 5 feet. When Liam finally reached the table, he grabbed his cup with shaking hands and drank greedily. "I'm firing her," Ethan decided. He grabbed his phone. This was too much. It was torture. He dialed the house line. The phone on the kitchen wall rang on the video feed. Sarah turned her head. She looked exhausted. She walked toward the phone. Ethan watched her hand reach for the receiver. But just before she picked it up, he looked at the living room feed again. The boys were eating. They weren't crying anymore. They were laughing. Liam had smeared peanut butter on Noah's nose. They looked alive. They looked like children who had accomplished something, not invalids waiting to die. Ethan's finger hovered over the end call button. He saw the fire in their eyes, a fire he hadn't seen since Elena died. Slowly, Ethan lowered the phone. He didn't speak. He watched Sarah answer, say, "Hello, Mr. Blackwood," into the silence, and then hang up when he didn't reply. He wouldn't fire her, not yet. He needed to see how far this would go. He needed to see the end of the movie he was watching. 2 more days, Ethan whispered to the image of the young woman who was either a miracle worker or a monster. "Show me what you're really doing, Sarah." He had no idea that the camera was about to reveal a secret that would shatter his reality completely. The biggest shock was yet to come. The miracle on the screen. The boardroom in Tokyo was a fortress of glass and steel, suspended high above the city's glittering skyline. 12 men in expensive suits sat around a mahogany table discussing assets, liabilities, and the future of Blackwood Industries. Ethan sat at the head, his face a mask of professional detachment. But under the table, his hand gripped his phone so tightly his knuckles were white. It was day 5, the final day before his return. "Mr. Blackwood," the Japanese CEO said, leaning forward, "we need your signature on the acquisition terms. This is the moment we have been waiting for." Ethan nodded, reaching for his gold fountain pen. But just as the nib touched the paper, his phone buzzed. It was a motion alert from the living room camera. It wasn't the usual notification. The pattern of movement was different, erratic, massive. "One moment," Ethan said, his voice cold. "Sir, this is highly I said 1 moment. Ethan pulled the phone out and tapped the notification. The app opened, buffering for a split second before the 4K feed snapped into razor-sharp focus. The image that filled his screen made the air leave his lungs as if he had been punched in the gut. The living room, usually a place of shadows and silence, was flooded with morning sunlight. The heavy velvet curtains had been pulled back completely. The furniture had been pushed to the perimeter, leaving a vast expanse of polished hardwood floor, but it was the background that froze Ethan's blood. Lined up against the white wall, beneath the oil portraits of his ancestors, were the 3 wheelchairs. They were empty, and they were folded. "What?" Ethan whispered, ignoring the 12 men staring at him. In the center of the room, Sarah was kneeling. She looked different today. She wasn't wearing her usual grey uniform. She was in athletic gear, her hair tied in a messy bun, sweat glistening on her forehead. Her arms were wide open, a gesture of absolute welcoming faith. And facing her, 10 feet away, were Noah, Liam, and Oliver. They were not sitting. Ethan brought the phone closer to his face, his eyes widening in disbelief. The boys were standing. They were holding on to the edge of the sofa for support, their little legs shaking violently inside their corduroy overalls. They looked terrified, but their jaws were set with a determination Ethan had never seen in a 4-year-old. "Okay, boys," Sarah's voice came through the tiny speaker, tinny but clear. "We did the work. We built the muscle. Now trust your bodies. Trust me." "I can't," Oliver whimpered, his knuckles white on the sofa fabric. "You can," Sarah said softly. "Eyes on me, Ollie. Just 1 step. Come to me." Ethan stopped breathing. The room in Tokyo faded away. There was only the screen. Slowly, agonizingly, Oliver let go of the sofa. He swayed, his balance precarious. He took a breath, scrunched his face in concentration, and swung his right foot forward. It slapped against the wood. Then the left. He took a step, then another. Ethan stood up, his chair crashing backward onto the floor. The executives jumped. "Impossible!" he gasped. On the screen, Oliver wobbled. He looked like he was about to fall. Ethan instinctively reached a hand out to the phone screen to catch him. But Oliver didn't fall. He corrected his balance, locked his knees, and took a 3rd step. He fell into Sarah's open arms, burying his face in her shoulder. "I did it!" Oliver screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "Your turn, Noah. Your turn, Liam," Sarah said, hugging Oliver tight while looking at the other 2. One by one, the other brothers let go of the safety of the couch. It was a messy, imperfect parade. They stumbled, they shook, but they walked. They walked across the floor that had been their prison for 2 years. When all 3 were in Sarah's arms, they collapsed into a heap of giggles and tears. Sarah looked up, directly into the camera lens. It was as if she knew he was watching. She didn't smile triumphantly. She looked fierce, protective, and exhausted. She mouthed 2 words, "Come home." Ethan dropped the phone. It clattered onto the expensive mahogany table, the screen still glowing with the image of his walking sons. "Mr. Blackwood?" the CEO asked, alarmed. "Is everything all right?" Ethan looked around the room, blinking as if waking from a coma. He looked at the contract worth billions of dollars. It looked like garbage to him now. "The deal is off," Ethan said, his voice shaking. "Excuse me?" "I have to go," Ethan said, grabbing his phone and sprinting toward the door. "I have to go home. Now!" He ran through the hotel corridors, ignoring the shouts of his assistants. He didn't care about the merger. He didn't care about the company. He had just witnessed a resurrection. The doctors had lied, the specialists had been wrong. The only person who had told the truth was the 25-year-old girl he had almost fired for cruelty. "Get the jet ready," he barked into his phone as he hit the elevator button. "I'm flying back to New York. If the pilot isn't ready in 30 minutes, I'll fly the damn plane myself." The stormy return. The flight from Tokyo to New York usually took 14 hours. To Ethan, it felt like 14 years. He spent the entire flight pacing the cabin of his Gulfstream, replaying the saved video clip over and over again. Folded wheelchairs, shaking legs, steps, steps, steps. How? How had she done in 5 days what the best neurologists hadn't done in 2 years? Was it adrenaline? Was it a temporary spasm? Or had his sons always been capable of this, and he had simply allowed them to rot in those chairs because he was too afraid to push them? The guilt began to eat at him, replacing the shock. He had been the protective father. He had forbidden exertion. He had treated them like glass dolls. Sarah had treated them like soldiers. And she had won. When the plane touched down at JFK, a storm was raging. Thunder rattled the windows of the limousine as his driver navigated the slick streets toward the Blackwood estate. The rain lashed against the windshield, mirroring the turbulence inside Ethan's mind. He didn't know whether to kiss Sarah or scream at her. She had kept this from him. She had experimented on his children without permission. It was reckless. It was dangerous. But it was miraculous. The car screeched to a halt in front of the mansion. The house was dark, save for a warm yellow glow emanating from the living room windows. Ethan didn't wait for the driver to open the door. He burst out into the rain, his expensive suit instantly soaked, and ran up the stone steps. He fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking, before finally shoving the heavy oak door open. "Sarah!" he roared, his voice echoing through the cavernous foyer. He stormed into the living room, water dripping from his hair, his chest heaving. He stopped dead. The room was quiet. The wheelchairs were unfolded. Noah, Liam, and Oliver were sitting in them, strapped in, watching cartoons on the TV. They looked exactly as they had when he left. Passive. Still. Sarah was sitting on the sofa, reading a book. She looked up calmly as he entered, marking her page before closing the book. She wore her uniform again, her hair neat, the sweat and fire of the morning gone. "Welcome home, Mr. Blackwood," she said politely. "You're early." Ethan looked at the boys, then at Sarah. He felt a surge of confusion. Had he hallucinated the video? He pulled his phone out and checked the recording. No, it was real. "Don't play games with me," Ethan whispered, walking toward her. The water from his clothes pooled on the hardwood floor. "I saw you." Sarah stood up. She didn't back away. "Saw what, sir?" "I saw the cameras," Ethan shouted, pointing at the hidden lens in the corner of the ceiling. The boys jumped in their chairs, startled by his volume. "I saw them walk. I saw you fold the chairs. Why are they sitting down? Why are you hiding it?" Sarah's expression shifted. The polite employee mask dropped, revealing the steely determination he had seen on the screen. "Because they aren't ready to show you yet," she said, her voice low and intense. "And you aren't ready to see it." "Not ready." Ethan laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "They are my sons. I have spent millions trying to fix them." "That's the problem," Sarah countered, stepping closer to him. "You tried to fix them. You treated them like broken machines. You hired doctors who looked at X-rays instead of looking at the boys. You created a home that was a hospital, not a home. I did what was best for them." "You did what was safe for you," Sarah yelled back. It was the first time anyone had raised their voice to Ethan Blackwood in years. You were so afraid of losing them that you wouldn't let them live. You coddled their muscles into atrophy. You told them they were disabled, so they believed you. Ethan stood frozen, stung by her words. "And who are you?" he hissed. "You're a nanny, a 25-year-old girl from an agency. What do you know about spinal trauma?" Sarah reached into her back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She slammed it against his chest. "Read it." Ethan unfolded the damp paper. It was a photocopy of a medical license. Sarah Miller, Doctor of Physical Therapy, Specialization, Pediatric Neurorehabilitation. "I'm not just a nanny," Sarah said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I was the head of the Rebel program at St. Jude's. I was fired 6 months ago because I refused to accept the insurance company's maintenance-only protocols for paralyzed children. I believe in neuroplasticity. I believe in aggressive therapy. No agency would hire me as a doctor because I was too radical. So I applied as a nanny." Ethan stared at the document, then at her. "You lied to get into my house." "I did what I had to do to save these boys," Sarah said. She turned to the triplets. "Boys!" The 3 boys looked at their father. They looked scared. Ethan's anger evaporated, leaving only a raw, aching vulnerability. "It's okay," Sarah nodded to them. "Show him." "Just like we practiced." Ethan watched, his heart hammering against his ribs. Noah reached down and unbuckled his strap. Liam did the same. Oliver struggled with the clasp, his small fingers fumbling, but he refused Sarah's help. Click. "Daddy?" Liam said softly. "I'm here," Ethan choked out. Slowly, the 3 boys pushed themselves up. It was harder now than it had been on the video. They were tired, and the pressure of their father's presence was heavy. But they stood. They stood tall, holding onto the armrests of their wheelchairs. Then they let go. They didn't walk to Sarah this time. They turned their bodies and took shaky, uncertain steps toward Ethan. "Look, Daddy," Noah said, breathless. "I'm tall." Ethan fell to his knees, the expensive suit ruined, the dignity forgotten. He was on their level now. He opened his arms, and his sons actually walked, into his embrace. The force of their small bodies hitting him knocked the wind out of him. He buried his face in their necks, smelling the baby shampoo and the sweat of their effort. He sobbed. He wept with a violence that shook his entire frame, releasing 2 years of grief, anger, and hopelessness. "I'm sorry," he whispered into their hair. "I'm so sorry I didn't believe." Over the boys' heads, Ethan looked up at Sarah. She was crying too, silent tears streaming down her face. She stood by the window, giving them their moment, ready to leave, ready to be fired for her deception. Ethan gently let go of the boys, wiping his eyes. He stood up, towering over the room again, but the coldness was gone. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her, for the first time. "You're not fired," he said, his voice hoarse. Sarah let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for a week. "I didn't think I would be." "But," Ethan continued, walking toward her, "you are done being a nanny." "I am." Sarah looked confused. "Yes." Ethan stopped inches from her. The air between them was electric, charged with the storm outside and the miracle inside. "Starting tomorrow, you are the director of rehabilitation for my family. You name your price. You name your terms. Just don't leave." Sarah looked at the man who had been an ice prince just minutes ago. She saw the desperation and the love in his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere, Ethan," she said, using his first name for the first time. The storm outside began to clear, the thunder fading into a distant rumble. But inside the house, everything had changed. The fortress of silence had been breached, and life, messy, loud, and beautiful, was flooding back in. A new life. 6 months had passed since the storm, and the Blackwood estate was no longer a fortress of silence. It was a chaotic, loud, and vibrant kingdom of noise. The sterile white walls, once pristine and untouched, were now adorned with finger paintings, smudges of chocolate, and photographs. The heavy velvet curtains were permanently tied back, allowing the sunlight to bleach the expensive hardwood floors. A sacrifice Ethan Blackwood was more than happy to make. It was the night of the annual Elena Blackwood Memorial Gala. In previous years, this event had been a somber affair, a gathering of New York's elite to offer polite condolences to the grieving widower and donate money to spinal research that Ethan secretly believed was futile. Tonight, however, the atmosphere was electric. In the master bedroom, Ethan stood before a full-length mirror, adjusting his black tie. He looked different. The lines of exhaustion around his eyes had smoothed out. The perpetual tension in his jaw was gone. He looked younger, lighter. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," Ethan called out. Sarah entered. She was breathtaking. For the last 6 months, Ethan had only seen her in yoga pants, medical scrubs, or her simple nanny uniforms. Tonight, she wore a deep emerald gown that hugged her silhouette, modest yet stunning. Her chestnut hair was cascaded in loose waves over one shoulder. "You look—" Ethan started, his voice catching in his throat. He cleared it, trying to regain his composure. "You look incredible, Sarah." Sarah blushed, a rare crack in her professional armor. "Thank you, Ethan. The boys are ready. They're nervous, but they're ready." Ethan turned from the mirror, his expression serious. "Are we sure about this? We don't have to do it. We can just attend the dinner. I don't want to put too much pressure on them." Sarah walked over to him, reaching out to straighten his lapel, a gesture so intimate and natural that it made Ethan's heart race. "They want to do this," she said firmly. "They've worked every single day. They've fallen 1,000 times. They want to show the world that they aren't broken. They want to show their dad off." "Show me off?" Ethan laughed softly. "I'm just the guy who writes the checks. You're the one who performed the miracle." "I didn't perform a miracle," Sarah corrected him, her eyes locking with his. "I just refuse to accept the impossible. There's a difference." "Well," Ethan covered her hand with his, "whatever it is, you saved us. All of us." The moment lingered, thick with unspoken feelings that had been building for months. The late-night conversations over tea after the boys were asleep. The shared laughter when Oliver learned to use a spoon without spilling. The way they moved around each other in the kitchen, a seamless team. "We should go," Sarah whispered, pulling her hand away slowly. "The limousine is waiting." The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was packed. A sea of diamonds, tuxedos, and champagne flutes. When Ethan took the stage, the room fell silent. Usually he would read a prepared speech about loss and resilience. Tonight, he had no note cards. He gripped the podium, looking out at the hundreds of expectant faces. "Thank you all for coming," Ethan began, his voice projecting strength. "For 3 years, I have stood on this stage and asked for your pity. I asked for your support because I believed my life had ended the day my wife died and my sons were injured." He paused, looking toward the curtain at stage left. "I was wrong. I thought paralysis was a life sentence. I thought my sons were destined to watch the world from a seated position. I built a cage around them and called it protection." A murmur went through the crowd. This was not the script. "But then," Ethan continued, a smile breaking across his face, "someone entered our lives. Someone who didn't care about my money or my grief. Someone who saw my sons not as patients, but as warriors. She taught me that the only true disability is the loss of hope." Ethan stepped back from the podium and gestured to the side of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Noah, Liam, and Oliver Blackwood." The room held its breath. The heavy velvet curtains parted. There were no wheelchairs. Out stepped the triplets. They were dressed in miniature tuxedos. They each held a small, custom-made crutch, bright red, their favorite color, but they were upright. Noah took the lead. His gait was swinging and slightly uneven, a testament to the severity of his injury, but it was powerful. He planted his crutch, swung his legs and took a step, then another. Liam followed, a bit faster. Oliver, the smallest but the most stubborn, brought up the rear. The silence in the ballroom was shattered. It started with a single clap, then a gasp, and then a roar. The entire room rose to its feet, a standing ovation that shook the crystal chandeliers. Grown men were wiping their eyes, women were openly weeping. The boys beamed, waving at the crowd like celebrities. They walked the 20 feet to their father. Ethan dropped to one knee, arms wide open, just as he had in the living room 6 months ago. They collapsed into him, laughing. "We did it, Daddy. Did you see?" "I saw, Noah. I saw," Ethan whispered, kissing their heads. He looked up. Standing in the wings of the stage, out of the spotlight, was Sarah. She was crying, clapping her hands, looking at the family she had rebuilt. Ethan beckoned her to come out. She shook her head, mouthing, "No, this is for you." Ethan stood up, holding his son's hands. He grabbed the microphone one last time. "And none of this," he boomed, "would be possible without the woman who taught us how to walk again, Dr. Sarah Miller." The spotlight swung, catching Sarah by surprise. She froze, dazzled by the light. The applause doubled in volume. Ethan didn't give her a choice. He walked over, the boys hobbling excitedly beside him, and pulled her onto the center stage. He held her hand up in victory, flanked by his 3 standing sons. The flashbulbs popped like fireworks. It was the perfect picture of a family. Later that night, back at the estate, the house was quiet again. The boys, exhausted from the excitement and the physical exertion, had fallen asleep instantly in the car. Sarah and Ethan had carried them up to their beds that were no longer hospital grade, but regular bunk beds with slides. Sarah walked into the kitchen to make tea. She felt drained but happy. Her job was technically done. The boys were integrated into a specialized school. They were mobile. They were happy. She heard footsteps behind her. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, still in his tuxedo, though the tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck. "That was quite a night," he said. "It was perfect," Sarah agreed, pouring the boiling water. "They were so proud. Did you see Oliver's face when the crowd cheered?" "I was looking at you," Ethan said. Sarah paused, the spoon clinking against the ceramic mug. She turned around slowly. "Ethan, I meant what I said on stage." He walked closer, closing the distance between them. The kitchen island felt like a very small barrier. "You saved me, Sarah, not just them, me." "I just did my job," she deflected, her heart pounding. "Is that all this is?" Ethan asked softly. "A job? Because if it is, I'm in trouble. I can't be your boss anymore, Sarah. I can't look at you across the breakfast table and pretend that I don't want to spend the rest of my life making you laugh." Sarah's breath hitched. "You're the billionaire Ethan Blackwood. I'm just the old maid from the agency who lied about her resume. You're the only real thing in my world," Ethan said. He walked around the island. He stood right in front of her. "I don't want a nanny. I don't want a therapist. I want you." He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and cupped her face. Sarah leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. "I was supposed to leave when they got better," she whispered. "That was the plan." "Plans change," Ethan murmured. He kissed her. It wasn't the tentative, careful kiss of a teenager. It was a kiss of relief, of passion, and of homecoming. It tasted like champagne and hope. Sarah wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him deeper, finally letting go of the professional boundary she had maintained for so long. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said, "not as an employee. Stay as whatever you want to be. Just stay." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "I think the boys need a mother figures," she teased gently, "and I think their father needs someone to keep him in line." "I definitely do," Ethan laughed. He picked her up, spinning her around the kitchen floor, the same floor where she had once knelt and begged his sons to crawl. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds had cleared, revealing a bright, full moon over the estate. In the garage, the folded wheelchairs sat in a corner, gathering dust. They wouldn't be needed tomorrow, or the day after. Ethan Blackwood had his life back. He had his sons. And as he held Sarah in his arms, listening to the quiet rhythm of the house he had once hated, he realized he finally had everything. The championship. 10 years later, the attic of the Blackwood estate was the only place that still smelled like the past. It was dusty, filled with boxes of tax returns and old furniture covered in white sheets. Ethan Blackwood, now 45, sat on a wooden stool, staring at a small, outdated tablet he had found in a box marked 2024. He tapped the screen. The battery was low, but the video file played. On the grainy display, he saw a younger version of himself, rigid, cold, terrified, staring at a hidden camera feed. He watched the pixelated image of Sarah, 10 years younger, kneeling on the floor. He watched 3 toddlers in corduroy overalls trembling as they took their first impossible steps. "Ethan!" The voice came from the bottom of the attic stairs. It was Sarah. "I'm up here," Ethan called back, quickly wiping a tear from his eye before turning off the tablet. Sarah climbed up. At 35, she was even more beautiful than the day she had arrived. Motherhood and happiness suited her. She wore a casual soccer jersey that read Team Blackwood on the back, tucked into jeans. "We have to go," she said, breathless. "The game starts in 40 minutes. If we're late, Oliver will kill us. He's starting forward today." Ethan stood up, slipping the old tablet into his jacket pocket. "I was just looking at something." Sarah glanced at the box and the tablet. She knew. She walked over and fixed his collar, her touch as grounding as ever. "Don't look back, Ethan. The view is much better looking forward." "You're right," he smiled, kissing her forehead. "Let's go watch our sons win." The sun was blazing over the state championship soccer field. The bleachers were packed with parents, scouts, and students. The energy was raucous. Ethan and Sarah found their seats in the front row. Next to them sat a slightly older, greyer Mrs. Higgins, who refused to miss a game, waving a foam finger. "There they are!" Mrs. Higgins shouted. Running onto the field were the Westbridge High Lions. Leading the pack were 3 boys who were impossible to miss. Noah, Liam, and Oliver were now 14 years old. They were tall, athletic, and fast. Ethan watched them run during the warm-up. It was a sight he never got tired of. Every sprint, every jump, every kick felt like a defiance of the laws of physics. He remembered the doctors telling him to buy a house with ramps. He remembered the wheelchair catalogues he used to browse late at night. Now, Noah was doing bicycle kicks. Liam was the goalkeeper, diving fearlessly into the dirt. And Oliver was the striker. "He looks nervous," Ethan muttered, leaning towards Sarah. "He's focused," Sarah corrected him, taking Ethan's hand. "He's been practicing that left-foot drive all week in the backyard. He broke 2 windows, remember?" "I remember the bill," Ethan laughed. The whistle blew. The game was brutal. The opposing team was bigger, more aggressive. For the first half, it was a stalemate, 0-0. In the second half, the tension spiked. A large defender from the other team tackled Noah hard. Noah hit the grass with a sickening thud, rolling over his ankle. Ethan shot up from his seat, his heart hammering against his ribs. The trauma of the past was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. Fragile. They are fragile. The word echoed in his mind. The referee blew the whistle. Noah lay on the grass, clutching his leg. "Oh, God," Ethan whispered. Sarah squeezed his hand so hard it hurt. "Wait, look." Noah didn't stay down. He gritted his teeth, slapped the grass in frustration, and then he stood up. He shook his leg out, gave a thumbs up to the coach, and jogged back into position. "He's okay," Sarah exhaled. "They aren't glass dolls anymore, Ethan. They're made of steel." The game clock ticked down. 89th minute, still 0-0. Then it happened. Liam caught a high ball in the goal box. He threw a long, perfect pass down the field to Noah. Noah dribbled past two defenders, spinning with a grace that belonged on a dance floor. He saw Oliver making a run on the left flank. "Pass it!" Ethan yelled, losing all his billionaire composure. "Pass it to your brother!" As if hearing him, Noah crossed the ball. It was a high arc, floating perfectly toward the penalty box. Oliver was there. But so was the opposing goalkeeper, a giant of a kid who rushed out to punch the ball away. It was going to be a collision. Ethan held his breath. 10 years ago, Oliver couldn't lift his head off a pillow without crying. 10 years ago, Oliver had dragged his body across a rug for a peanut butter sandwich. Now, Oliver jumped. He leaped into the air, soaring higher than the goalkeeper. It was a moment of pure athletic perfection. He connected with the ball, his forehead snapping forward. Thwack! The ball rocketed past the keeper's gloves and smashed into the back of the net. The whistle blew. Game over. 1-0. The crowd erupted. But Ethan didn't hear the crowd. He only saw his sons. Noah and Liam sprinted toward Oliver, tackling him in a heap of joy. The three of them rolled on the grass, limbs tangled, laughing, screaming, alive. Ethan felt wetness on his cheeks. He wasn't the only one. Sarah was crying openly, smiling through the tears. "They did it," she whispered. "No," Ethan turned to her. "You did it." Later that evening, the Blackwood estate was hosting a victory party. Pizza boxes were stacked high on the marble countertops. The living room, the same room where the cameras had once been installed, was filled with sweaty, loud teenagers playing video games. Ethan stepped out onto the terrace for a moment of quiet. The moon was full, just like that night 6 months after Sarah arrived. He heard the sliding door open. It wasn't Sarah this time. It was Oliver. He was limping slightly, a battle scar from the game, and holding a slice of pepperoni pizza. "Hey, Dad," Oliver said, leaning against the railing. "Hey, champ," Ethan smiled, putting an arm around his son's shoulders. "That was a hell of a goal." "Thanks," Oliver chewed thoughtfully. "Coach said a scout from the university was there. Said I have natural explosive power in my legs." Ethan chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. Natural explosive power. If only they knew how much that power cost. Oliver looked at his father. He was old enough now to understand the history. He knew about the wheelchairs in the garage. He knew about the struggle. "Mom told me something today," Oliver said quietly. "Oh? What did she say?" "She told me that when we were little, you used to watch us on cameras because you were scared. She said you fired everyone because you loved us too much to let us get hurt." Ethan stiffened. He hadn't expected Sarah to frame it that way. He had always thought he was the villain of that part of the story. "I was scared," Ethan admitted, looking at the moon. "I was terrified that the world would break you." Oliver bumped his shoulder against Ethan's. "You didn't break us, Dad. You found the person who could fix us. That's the same thing." Ethan looked at his son, strong, kind, and wise beyond his 14 years. "Go inside," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your brothers are eating all the pizza." "Save you a slice?" "Yeah, save me a slice." Oliver went back inside. Through the glass, Ethan saw Sarah laughing at something Noah said. She looked up, saw Ethan outside, and raised her glass in a silent toast. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the old tablet. He looked at the grainy image of the paralyzed triplets one last time. Then he walked over to the edge of the terrace. Below him was the large decorative fountain. Ethan looked at the tablet, then back at the vibrant, loud, happy family inside the house. He didn't need the reminder anymore. He didn't need to hold on to the fear. He tossed the tablet into the fountain. It splashed and sank to the bottom, the screen flickering out forever. Ethan Blackwood turned his back on the dark garden, opened the door, and walked back into the light, joining the noise, the chaos, and the life he had almost missed. The true end.